some credit for that. Right, we've got a few things to do today, so we will make a start. Today's Kahoot quiz is, I've chosen Kahoot on purpose because I gave you a list of words last week for homework to add to our vocabulary list. So I want to do some keywords, some definition testing today, in addition to our extensive list that we already had, of course. Um, Mina got moved to a higher set in English. Oh, that's amazing. It's always good to hear everybody's wins. Amazing. We love celebrating wins. If you have anything you ever want to share, please do. I love it. I love seeing people do well. Okay, right. So again, it's literally going to be all vocab questions in this. So, first things first. Which word, as meant to say, means to suffer from pain, sickness, or trouble, or to be unwell? And this is one of our words from last week's poem homework. So this will test who did it and who did not. Let me get that whacked up for you now. Some people did not read the poem, and it's a good job we're going to go through it today. It's ale. Yeah, yeah. Ale is a not common word you really hear people use anymore. But it's a really nice one for expanding your vocab. Yeah. Like if someone is suffering from poor health, you can say that it ails them. It's nice. Nice word. Okay, extreme mental or physical pain, distress, or suffering. Again, our list from last week's homework. Okay, a couple of people got this right. Yeah, anguish. Yeah, yeah, yeah. To suffer physical or mental distress. Okay, hanging around or lingering aimlessly, staying in one place without purpose. Okay, nice. I think this one was a tiny bit easier. Yeah, if you loiter somewhere, you kind of just hang about. Okay, looking exhausted, worn out, or unhealthy, usually from suffering or worrying. Oh, it's a speedy one. Yeah, I allowed one of two here. The technically correct term is haggard, but I allowed withered because it's within the same ballpark. But I was looking for haggard. It's like a synonym, haggard and withered, really. So I allowed it. Enjoyment of pleasure, something that delights the senses. Okay, nice. It's relish. See, people have not been doing their homework. However, I want to stress to you, these are really useful keywords, or to expand your vocab at least. Relish is a lovely word. Um, like if you enjoy something greatly, you can say that you relish in doing that thing. It's a really nice, emotive word. A temporary stay or visit in a place. Hey, most people got this right. I'm guessing you knew the other words and it was the odd one out, maybe. But yeah, absolutely right. Again, that's a good like level 9 word for GCSEs. Soothed or calmed, often into sleep or a relaxed state. Okay. Okay. It was only, yeah, one person is to be lulled. Lulled again. There's a really good one in your creative writing if you're wanting to use like consonants. Lull is a lovely word for that. Like it's almost a very onomatopoeic word as well. Which word means excessive confidence or boldness, audacity? So these are back onto our words that we should hopefully know that we are going to keep revisiting. Oh, it's temerity, this one. Yeah, to do something with confidence is to have temerity. Which word means a private or secret meeting? Again, a really nice one for creative writing. It can be used in a very metaphoric way if you wanted to do so. For example, if you were wanting to speak about or write about like a bacterial or a dust colony in like a abandoned room, you might describe the big ring of dust as like a conclave of dust. Good metaphoric. Bit of writing for you, just an idea. A lot of these words I've chosen for that reason because they can be used in a very figurative way as well as literal, just to give you some ideas for creative writing. Which word means not clear or not well defined? Bum, bum, mm. Mm. It is indistinct. Okay, right. Halfway point. Horrifying, especially because it involves death or injury. Okay, it is macabre, yeah. Okay, who's winning this one? Halfway. Strange and scary in a mysterious way. Hey, it is eerie. Yeah, a lot of people seem to know that one. Nice. Not to be confused with desolate, of course. Hey, refusing to change your mind. Yeah. Oh, not many people got this one. I thought adamant was quite a common word. It's definitely not timid, because if you're timid, you're quite small, you're quite shy. Um, so it has to be adamant. Yeah. Okay. A rapid outburst of shots and noises. Again, a really lovely one to use figuratively within things like metaphors. Yeah, as a fusillade. Oh, I do love that word, and it would be a really nice one to use. For example, if you were talking about the weather, you might say the wind, I don't know, presented a fusillade of gusts, something like that. Almost giving the impression of how violent the wind is. Okay, beating or throbbing strongly. Bum, bam, yeah, it's pulsating. I have to say, one thing I miss about Kahoot is the music. It's not the same on Look It. Okay, a word that is a synonym for friendly. Bing, bing, bing. Ooh, a little 50-50 split on this one. Yeah, it is amiable. Amiable means friendly. Twilight. Now, this is one of our words from last week's homework poem. Poem that will give you the homework. It is gloam. Yeah, it's just another word for twilight. So, when the sun goes down, the moon comes up. Oh, okay. Very careful and precise. Nice. It is meticulous. Again, a 50-50 split. Yeah, if you do something meticulously, you do it very carefully, like with purpose, making sure not to cause any errors. Okay. Dull, bleak, and lifeless. Okay, and two people got this. Yeah, dreary. Foreboding is within that ballpark, of course, but foreboding is more like when you're hinting at something dark to come rather than it being like a setting, for example, whereas dreary is more relating to setting in the present. Okay, three more left. Unable to be, that's meant to say explained. Unable to be explained. It is nice. Even has most of it in the words. Explicable. Okay, two more. We're very close. Full of confusion, noise, and disorder, involving strong emotions or great disturbance. Oh, only one person got this. Yeah, it's tumultuous. Vivid is like really bright colors. Abrupt is when something stops suddenly. Anguish, you've already been over. And so it has to be tumultuous. Okay, last question. Done quietly to avoid being noticed. Lovely. It is stealthily. Okay, let's see who has won this week. Although I think I already have an idea. So the winner must be nice. Well done. It's nice to see someone other than I can't remember who always wins. Step to Success champ always wins, don't they? Well done. Okay, down to business of what we're doing today. I said to you last week we would do our final poem. So that's what we're going to do. Um, I think this is kind of today is going to be like the epitome of everything that we have been doing. If you've been with me for a long time now, we have looked in detail at each of the language devices. We took a little bit of a break in between and we started to do some non-fiction. And then we came back to poetry. And last week we looked at a poem that was to do with war. So I wanted to take a little bit of a step back and look at a type of poem that's not to do with war, and to look at one to do with love and relationships, just to give you a little bit of variety. Now, before we go into this, I will say this is a poem that is maybe on the harder end of the difficulty spectrum. Um, It's not normally a poem I would do Key Stage 3, granted. I would normally do it with my year 11s, even year 12s. So, just to brace you, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. But it's a beautiful poem nonetheless. And we're not going to look at it in too much detail. We'll look at it more from the lens of inferences and what's actually going on, and see if we can spot any language analysis within there, of course. And then from next week, we're going to go back onto some simpler things like grammar, punctuation, all of that jazz. So let's end on a high on poetry, shall we? Now, I wanted to briefly remind you when we're thinking about language in poems, we're thinking about all of these techniques. These are all things that you could see in poems. Very similar to when you analyze fiction writing, you're looking for these things and how they impact the reader, what the writer is trying to tell you. So, we looked last week at ballads. Now, we said ballads can be about a lot of things. Ballads tend to be stories, they're like the fiction equivalent of poetry. They are intended so that the reader learns something about life. And we came across the one about war last week, and we're going to look at love this week. And I've highlighted specifically romance and adventure because this week, the poem we're going to look at is about knights and mystery. Specifically, this one here. So, let me check the chat. Why did we not do Blookit? Because I wanted to test you on key terms, and with Blookit, I can't see what you're doing, and I like being able to see who's done what. It's just nice. So say Rapunzel, Rapunzel. Okay. So briefly, I wanted to introduce you to romantic poetry. Um, this is something that you'll learn more about at GCSE, but I'll give you the very rundown of romantic poetry. This was kind of about between the late 18th and early 19th century. So we're talking like 1700s to like mid 1800s was when this was kind of going about. And what defines a romantic poem is it doesn't just have to be about romance. The point of romantic poetry is it's heavy on emotion. It's supposed to get the reader to feel things. It's supposed to encourage the reader to look introspectively, to look inwards and think about life on a deeper level, other than just thinking about like science and war. It's about encouraging the reader to just feel and be. And so you often find in the romantic poetry that there is a heavy focus on the individual, and it often reflects personal experiences of the poet, and often includes things like the supernatural and the things that are unexplainable or inexplicable, if we're going to use our keywords. And you often get quite a heavy focus on nature as well, because if we're thinking back to symbolism, of which there is a lot in this poem today, nature can be quite heavy on symbols. So, for example, flowers can represent things. Weather types can represent emotions. So we often find heavy natural imagery in romantic poetry. And the key ones, the key poets, are people like William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and John Keats, among others, of course, Percy Shelley and etc. And the connection to literature is that the romantic poems often explore beauty, love, and human suffering, encouraging readers to deeply reflect deeply on emotion and imagination. So, let's look at the poem we're going to do today. Fun fact. I'm getting a lot of random facts in the comments today. Someone's just started singing Lady Gaga for some reason. So the poem that we're doing is called La Belle Dame Sans Merci, a very, very, very famous romantic written by the poet John Keats in 1819. And to give you a very brief rundown of what this poem is about, it's about a knight who encounters a mysterious lady in the meadow. And the lady seems to seduce him with her beauty and songs, and he falls very deeply obsessed with her, as if under her spell. The knight dreams one night of past victims of the lady, realizing that he is doomed. He awakens alone on a cold hillside, pale and haggard and alone, left bewitched and desolate. So, in other words, she is kind of like a witch-like character. She lures him in with her beauty and then betrays him and tries to kill him. And that's basically what this poem is about. And so we're going to explore love in this context. What this story is trying to tell us about love. Because the knight falls in love with the woman, but does the woman fall in love with the man is the question we've got to answer today. So we've also briefly, I wanted to introduce you to this idea of mythology in romantic poetry as well. When we think of myths, you might think of like Greek mythology, Roman mythology, and often what you'll find is myths are often symbolic of stories and are often allegories. We've come across the word allegory many times before. It's when a story teaches you something about life. And so often mythical creatures represent things like human emotions, desires, but most often moral lessons, things that we're supposed to learn. So, for example, in today's poem, we'll come across this enchanting lady who symbolizes not only love, but danger as well. And you also get things like connection to the sublime, where myths often link humans to larger, mysterious forces in nature. So why do poets actually include mythology? Well, it's mainly to induce moral lessons, as well as to explore universal truths about life and the greater universe. So if you're not getting this already, romantic poetry is purely just about trying to understand the human experience. And that's why it's so popular and so beautiful. And the last thing I wanted to introduce you to very quickly is this idea of the femme fatale character. This is something you'll come across at GCSE in quite a lot of texts. Femme fatales are basically a type of woman character who allures other characters and they lead them in and then betray them. So it tends to be a mysterious, alluring woman who captivates the man in the poem and leads them to their death or to danger or to some sort of despair. So they use their natural beauty in order to sort of ensnare the main character. Yeah, and their characteristics tend to be that they're quite seductive, they're charming, but also quite mysterious. And they don't tend to give off any sort of danger until it's too late. So, yeah, they kind of lure you in under false pretenses and then they get you later. And in romantic poetry, they tend to symbolize this idea of power as well as the danger of love. So when we're talking about love, it's not all just like positive. It's not just like, oh, that's really cute, like one person loves another. It's like the danger of love as well. Why is it sometimes a bad thing, or can it be a bad thing? And that's part of understanding the human experience. That love is beautiful, but it can also cause a lot of pain and suffering as well. But that's just what makes life beautiful. So they use things like the femme fatale character to represent the idea that love can also be dangerous and can also cause suffering. And they also highlight a sort of conflict as well and create a sense of mystery, fear, and the supernatural. So in our poem, for example, we'll come across the lady character who can be classed as a femme fatale character. She's beautiful and she's captivating, but then she leaves the knight abandoned and desolate, and tries to kill him. So she is a femme fatale character, showing how love can be beautiful and seductive, but can also destroy you as well. So, a really common idea of femme fatale are things like sirens, right? Sirens are like mythological creatures that supposedly they are mythological creatures that live in the sea. And they were described as like luring sailors who were sailing past them with their beautiful songs. And they would do that to basically like kill them and eat them. So they're really famous examples of like femme fatale characters. But I do want to very briefly, this is the last thing I would say, is explore the opposite ends. Because I've shown you the femme fatale character. In this context, the femme fatale is the stereotypical quote unquote villain. She's the one that lures the man in and tries to kill him. Surely that would be the villain, right? But a lot of people actually study this poem from a different perspective. They don't necessarily view it as like the woman is the villain. In fact, some people read it like the knight is actually the villain. And the reason they do this is because you've got to consider when the poem was written. At the time this poem was written, men were believed to be the breadwinners. They were the dominant force in a relationship. And in romantic poetry, they're often portrayed as quite positive, like active thinkers, creators, explorers, and they're given independence and power. Whereas the women are often presented as like passive and silent and pure. And obviously, that wouldn't stand in today's society. Like, that's not what we believe today. And the danger of that is that it reinforces things like stereotypes and inequality between genders. Um, so some people read the poem as actually the man is the villain here. And we'll try and explore why that might be today. Because even though she tries to capture and kill him, some people still read it as the man is the villain. Because you might read it from today's perspective. Um, and we'll see why that is. So When we're reading through this poem, I want you to keep these two questions in mind. Who is the author trying to tell what is the author trying to tell the reader about love? And who do you think is in the wrong? Is it the male knight or is it the female femme fatale? And that is up to you what you believe. Where's my video not loading? So I've got a video for you. A reading of the poem. See what you think. When it loads.
Holy knight at arms, alone and palely loitering. The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, so haggard and so woe begone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest's done. I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a faery's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. I made a garland for her head, bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else saw all day long, for sidelong would she bend and sing a fairy song. She found me roots of relish sweet, and honey wild and dew, and sure, strange as a lovely tree. She took me to her elfin grot, and there she wept and sighed forsworn, and there I shot her wild kisses fall. And there she lulled me asleep, and there I dreamed, ah, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamed, on the cold hillside. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La belle dame sans merci hath thee in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaped wide, and I awoke and found me here, on the cold hillside. And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing.
Okay, right. Yeah, a little reading by Ben Winshaw. Someone said, is giving AI. I'm pretty sure this was made like 13 years ago. I think this is way before AI. And the poem was written hundreds of years ago, so definitely not AI. Right. So, we're gonna work our way. We've only got half an hour, so we probably won't get through all of this, but we're gonna get through as much as we can. Just have a go. That's what today's all about. A bit of an accumulation, as I said. The title, La Belle Dame Sans Merci, roughly translates to The Beautiful Woman Without Mercy. Firstly, before we even look at the poem, why do you think Keats titled the poem like this? What was he trying to tell the reader? Do you think he was trying to make you feel a certain way or think a certain way? Anyone got any ideas? At the end, he gets made ill, and it's implied that he dies. Why do you think they've titled this poem this way? No ideas. I mean, it literally is called "A Beautiful Woman Without Mercy." It's implying that the knight is the woman is the villain again. Um, yeah, it's implying that the woman is like the villain here. So it's trying to kind of already influence the reader into feeling pity and sympathy for this knight by calling it that. She was beautiful but cruel. She absolutely is. Love is blind. Yeah, that's a really good takeaway from this poem, actually. Love is blind. This guy is blinded by her. He becomes obsessed with her until she lulls him into a sleep, and yeah, she tries to kill him. So we'll skip all the rhymes theme today. I want to go into directly thinking about picking this poem apart. So let's break it down stanza by stanza. In this first stanza, a knight is found alone and pale, appearing sick and abandoned. So I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to write on this today. Let's work our way through. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? Is there any sort of language devices in here that you would pick out? So anything that might, um, I guess our question for today is, first, who do you think is in the wrong? And B, what does it tell us about love? Well, what I would pick out of this poem, oh, minute, we've got a few things coming in. Trauma, rhetorical question is absolutely there. Yeah, alone and palely loitering. The speaker here is like an external narrator. Um, It starts with, oh, what can ail the United Arms? We've got quite a high expression here. I'm going to label it as like an expression. What do you think the effect is of beginning the whole poem with this like expression, this oh is? What do you think that's trying to make the reader feel? Love is disguised as death? Yeah, it's a good way of thinking about it. Bit bleak, but yeah. By starting with like an expression, it's there to like evoke pity from the audience. Like, oh, it's quite an expressionist term, and you kind of use it when you're like in shock, when you're surprised. And so by using it in response to the knight's illness, it kind of evokes sympathy for the knight, really. And we've got a tone really of pity as well. I put a tone of concern, really. Because right now we've got a knight walking along a cold hillside and he looks deathly ill. It describes him as alone and palely loitering. We've got what I would say is a semantic field there, like alone and pale. And even this idea of like withered, pale, ale, alone. You've got this like semantic field of illness. So all of these words are within the same genre of illness. Why do you think not the reader, the author has chosen to use multiple words describing illness? What impression do you think it's trying to give? Any ideas? How does it make you feel as a reader reading this poem for the night? To show how ill he is? Yeah, yeah, but why? We've got to think deeper. Why has the writer chosen to do that? It kind of, to me, suggests like death and decay. Like we've got this idea of withering. You wither when you're like getting worse. Like you're almost withering is like what a plant does when it's dying, when it's decaying. So it's almost suggestive that the knight is dying, and so therefore I would say evokes quite a strong sense of sympathy for the knight because he's in this state of decay and death. We've also got the sedge has withered from the lake. A sedge is basically just plants. So what it's trying to say is the plants are no longer growing near the lake. We've got our first example of natural imagery here. I told you the Romantics love to include nature when they're making descriptions in poems. Um, why do you think the poet has used this idea of like plants dying in the description of the knight's illness? Any ideas? What's it trying to show about the knight or about love? Because the plants are dying, they're no longer surviving next to the lake. To me, that also that kind of gives the idea of like emptiness. Emptiness. Almost again like decay. desolation. Um, and to me, that is like foreshadowing. I think it's our first example of foreshadowing. It's almost linking the death of nature to the illness of the night to foreshadow his demise later down the line. His demise later in the poem. The plants are reflecting the night's suffering. So I'll put the night's suffering. So we tend to use imagery when it's like figuratively reflecting inner emotion. So yeah, to me, that idea of the withering of the of nature suggests suffering is emphasizing the night's suffering, and that's emphasized by the no birds sing. What we know about birds, birds tend to be a symbol of joy and happiness and life. So the fact that no birds sing, that's suggesting the opposite, death, decline. It's suggesting, or I guess I put forebodes, is probably a good word to describe it, forebodes towards death or the night's death and demise. It's like playing on this idea of the naturalistic imagery. Yeah, suggesting like barrenness, like almost like the joy has gone. Because if the birds symbolize joy and they're no longer singing, it's suggestive that the joy is now gone. Which again makes you feel quite sympathetic towards the night. Yeah, because it's all describing the night. Presenting quite an eerie tone if we are going to use our vocabulary. Yeah, there's sort of an eerie tone there. Right, let me see what's been said in the chat. Sorry. Depression. Maybe he was lonely and she was giving him attention. I mean, that kind of is the point, really. Like we talk about the patriarchy. Um, yeah, I guess a good way of viewing it. Like he was lonely. She gave him attention. He loved it. She took advantage of him. Absolutely. Okay, second stanza. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms? So haggard and so woebegone. The squirrel's granary is full and the harvest's done. Let's focus on the first two lines for now. We've got repetition here of that first line again. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms? Why do you think the writer has repeated this first line? Any ideas? What's it trying to emphasize about the knight or about love or any of that? And, or how does it affect you as a reader reading it? Does it make you feel anything towards the knight by having that repetition? Because to me, it's almost reinforcing my concern as a reader. By re-establishing to me when I'm reading it that he's suffering, it's almost making me feel worse for him. So I'm going to put the repetition is almost like a cyclical cycle of misery and is therefore making me as a reader feel worse. So as a repetition there. Repetition. So haggard and woe begone. Like it's describing him with quite emotive language. Haggard, woe begone. Like he's disheveled. Um, Almost to me suggesting the language, like the emotive language, is almost indicative of extreme suffering. So I'm going to put emotive language um, suggestive of extreme suffering. And I think that's supported by the consonants of the line as well. We've got haggard and so woe begone. We've got quite plosive consonants there, and we tend to use plosive consonants when we're trying to mimic like violent, harsh acts. And so, if we've already got a motive language that suggests extreme suffering, the plosive consonance is there to emphasize that suffering. And therefore, as a reader, you feel worse for the knight, but emphasizes suffering. As it's almost mimicking the brutal act that has got him there. But mimics a brutal act of the woman. Now, the squirrel's granary is full and the harvest is done. The squirrel's granary is full is a metaphor, a naturalistic metaphor. When it says the squirrel's granary is full, it's referring to, like, when squirrels go into hibernation and they hoard loads of food so that they can eat it throughout the winter months. That's what it means. It's referring to like squirrels' hibernation. Why do you think the writer has referenced this idea of hibernation? Yeah, I can zoom out. Why do you think it's linked to this metaphor of nature? Plosives, hard sounds. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm going to link the metaphor to almost like juxtaposing the knight's situation. By telling us that the squirrel's granary is full, it's almost telling us that nature is thriving. Like, I'm going to put thriving nature. However, that's heavily juxtaposed to the condition of the knight, who is definitely not thriving. So I've got juxtaposition to the knight. So it's almost therefore emphasizing how, I guess, horrid the knight's situation is. Like he's so disconnected from life. It's almost like emphasizing his decay. So I put, by contrast to the thriving nature, it emphasizes his state of his suffering and his state of decay. And decay. Yeah, so talking about how good nature is, it's heavily contrasting him. And the harvest's done. When we think about harvests being complete, oops, doing use purple. That tends to be like indicative or symbolic is probably a better word, of like the completion of nature and the cycle of nature. Let's not go red, let's go pink. So when harvest is done, it's symbolic of nature, of like the cycle of nature coming to completion. Symbolic of, yeah, cycle of nature. You might often hear the cycle of nature be referred to as the cycle of life and death. Like how a plant grows and its leaves will sprout. But then in the colder months, it will shed its leaves. Like the trees turn to orange and they shed all their leaves, and the leaves just decay on the ground. But then come spring, the leaves start sprouting again. So often nature is seen as like a cycle of life and death. So when the harvest is done, it's almost symbolizing the end of that cycle. Because harvest tends to be like autumn time, which is when the leaves turn brown and begin falling off the trees. So it's almost like the end of nature's cycle, a cycle of nature, and I'll put life versus death. So by almost, I guess this is more indicative of death because this is the end of the cycle. So by linking the night to this idea of the end of the cycle, it links the night to the imagery of death. It links the night to death by comparing him to being harvest or harvest being done is almost symbolic of him dying. And so far, again, you feel empathetic towards the night. I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose, fast withereth too. Now, this is like I said, plants often symbolize things in romantic poetry. A lily is a good example of this. Lilies, if you didn't know, are like the traditional funeral flower. So people often have them at funerals. So lilies often symbolize things like death. Um, yeah, so I put symbolize death, which, yeah, is not good for the night, is it? Because the narrator is saying, I see a lily on thy brow, like on their forehead. And so it's almost saying that like you look so ill that you look like deathly ill. Um, so he's almost saying that the knight looks like he's dying. To have a lily on thy brow. With anguish moist and fever dew. Literally, he's sweating. If he a dew is like a liquid, you know how like in the morning sometimes you get like dew on plants. Um, yeah, it's like a liquid. So fever dew literally refers to him sweating, which we associate with being ill. Because when you're ill, you get like feverish, and so you begin to sweat. Um, but yeah, with anguish, moist, and fever dew, just because this idea of like suffering again. So you've got this like repeated mention of liquid, like repeated, I guess, how would you call it? Like water related imagery. So physically he's sweating, but also, I guess, on a figurative level, you've got suffering, anguish, moist, and fever dew. And on thy cheeks a fading rose. A rose is probably one you'd be more familiar with. His suffering begins anew. Yeah, exactly. Suffering begins anew. It's like a cycle of life and death. It's never ending. What does a rose tend to represent in literature? What does a rose tend to symbolize? No, it is. Water flows forever, so it's the night's eternal suffering. Yeah, it is eternal suffering. Yeah. Love and happiness. Yeah. A rose is stereotypically associated with love. Now it says, on thy cheeks, a fading rose. If the rose is fading, what might that represent, do you think? Because on a normally roses symbolize love and beauty. So I put there like a symbol of love and beauty. But if the rose is fading, what's that telling us about the way he looks, about his condition, about love, losing love? Yeah, possibly. I think, yeah, I'm gonna put that. I think he is losing love. I think almost though, it's more saying that the love that he experienced was so was like the cause of his suffering almost. Like it was so strong that it killed him. Like a fading rose is definitely losing love, but I put love so strong it killed him. Killed him. Yeah. So rose is a symbol of love and beauty. Now, literally, what it's describing is like when you get ill, you get like really red cheeks. What it's saying is like you're losing that redness, and so it's almost giving the idea of like the blood um coming away from his skin, so he looks like physically like pale is what it's literally describing. But by comparing it to like the metaphor of the rose, it's furthering this figurative understanding that it's to do with love. It wants you to think about love and the fact that love is being lost, and that was the thing that killed him. And then as well, you get this repetition of withered again. We saw in was it the previous one? No, it was the one up here. The sensuous withered. We get this repetition of this word withered. Why do you think the author has repeated the word withered or withereth? Of dying, it was all lie all long. Any ideas why I repeated the word withered or witherer? I'll tell you what I think. I think it's giving the impression of like accelerated decay. Right? Like it's almost like he's dying so fast and it's uncontrollable or untreatable. Untreatable. That's how powerful this woman was when she tried to kill him. Okay, right, I'm gonna quickly move on. We've probably got time for another two stanzas. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. So the first three stanzas are set after he's met the woman. He's on a field, he's dying, basically. Now, we get a flashback from this point onwards, and it cuts back to when he first met the woman. It says, I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Let's focus on this idea of the fairies child, I think. When you think of fairy, you think of like supernatural, you think of myths, supernatural, a very mythological supernatural. Yeah, you kind of get this idea of like mythological creatures is what I was trying to think of. So, in terms of a language device, that's a really good example of illusion. Because when we think of a fairy, we think of like the supernatural, almost like when I showed you at the beginning, this idea of the siren. It's almost like alluding to the siren, like she's luring him in. Um, Therefore, we could argue that it's foreshadowing or foreboding danger, doing danger, because we've alluded to the siren or the supernatural, which we associate with danger. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. So we've got the idea, firstly, of her hair. Back in those days, like historically, if a woman had like her hair down and it was like long, it was associated with like promiscuity, basically. Like she was quite a promiscuous sexual woman, like she was enticing, basically. So her long hair is symbolic of her promiscuity, which is a typical characteristic of a femme fatale. She lures him in. She lures him in. Yeah, she lures him in. And so again, it's kind of like foreshadowing his demise and almost making us feel quite bad for him. We've also got her foot was light and her eyes were wild. We've got some like fricative consonants there as well. Fricative consonants. We tend to use fricative sounds when we want to replicate suffering. So the purposeful choice of that fricative consonants again is like foreshadowing the suffering because mimicking what will be a violent act towards the night. And so we feel the impending doom, like it's foreboding. And her eyes were wild. Got quite emotive language there. The wild eyes, like it's very emotive. It's very strong emotive language. In the wild eyes. When we think of wild, we kind of have the associations of like untamed, of like dangerous if something is wild, dangerous, almost like unpredictable as well, which is very foreboding. Predict. Oops, spell that wrong. Yeah, it's very foreboding. If something is if someone is dangerous and unpredictable, that's yeah, it would make me feel quite uncomfortable. And again, we're foreshadowing that suffering as well. Okay, we've got time for one more stanza. Go on. It's a short one. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love. So, let's end it with this. I made a garland for her head. I wanted to end here because this is a good example of our debate that we could have. Because I think this is a good, I keep saying good example, but it is a good example of how that he might actually be the villain here. Because some people read this stanza as like him being very dominant and controlling. Think about the language that's used here. I made a garland for her. Um, yeah, like he does things for her. The pronoun of the I kind of makes him the center, like personal pronoun there. Like the way that it's phrased is almost indicative of like him being the dominant force. Like he thinks he's the one in control. Like, and he made a garland for her head, bracelets. You could view these as quite romantic acts. Like if you make something for your partner, it can be viewed as quite sweet. But the thing about garlands and bracelets is they go around you. Like bracelets like enclose you. A garland goes on your head and it encloses you. So some people read these as like symbols of like entrapment, almost like he's taken her prisoner. Not literally, but like, yeah, like kind of implied that these gestures of devotion are actually deeper attempts to like dominate her, basically, and like control her. And so some like feminist readers interpret it like he is the bad guy, like he's trapping her by giving these like enclosing gifts. Um, yeah, so some people read it like that. It could symbolize his attempt to capture her, like he believes that he like owns her kind of thing. Um, which yeah, increases the tension. And then this final line, she looked at me as she did love. Like, it's the as she here. It's kind of giving this idea of ambiguity. Like, it's not saying that she did love him, it's like suggesting that she might love him. Um, so it gives this ambiguity, which foreshadows again her femme fatale role. It foreshadows her femme fatale role, almost the suffering that's going to come later down the line. Um, yeah. So yeah, and that creates like tension for the reader because you don't know what's going to happen. Now, I wish I'd been able to get through that entire poem because it is a really good one. But I didn't. It wasn't the focus of today. The point was that we had a go and we saw there were things you could pick out of poems, and that there are poems that aren't just about war. Personally, better poems. I don't think ones about war are particularly great, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of all I had for you today. And we're going to move away from poetry a little bit come next week. Because we've kind of done all we can with poems now. And I hope that I've given you ideas of things you could pick out of poems. If you want to go read the rest of this poem and have a go at sending me an answer, last week's homework was to do this. So if you want to go away and send me any sort of writing that you want to do on stanzas 6 to 12, please do. I encourage it because it's a really nice poem, and it'd be really nice to see your perspective on whether you think the knight or the woman is to blame and is in control, because it's a really good debate to be had. You know, was he just being romantic, giving her these nice gifts, or was he trying to metaphorically entrap her with the garland of the bracelets? Up to you to decide, really. It's a nice poem, either way. Right. Let's see what's been said. Maybe he killed her. I don't think he killed her. I think that's necessarily implied in the poem. I'm trying to think. Like later on, he says, I set her on my pacing steed. Like he is in control. However, she looks sideways. Like she shouldn't look directly at him. So there is a debate to be had here. Right. Okay. Let's move on to some GCSE work. Get my slides up. Okay. This time I am going to block it with you for those of you who are here. Just a very quick one though, because we've got other things to do today. Um, nice. So yeah, I'll take questions. If any of you got any questions whilst I set up the bucket, please ask them now. I'm all ears. I do one we haven't done yet. Let's go. Roll 8 minutes. No, I want a shorter one than 8 minutes. Nah, a little bit more brawl. Go on then. Right. Right, I'm going to set it a bit lower today, I think, because we've not got that much time. Let's literally set it for. I might even do 3 minutes. Come on. Just because I've not got that much time. Right. Good evening to those of you who have joined. How is everyone? Has anyone got any questions? Please say. I'm all ears, by the way, if you have anything you want to or have me go over. Um, next time. Yeah, please, because we're here for you at the end of the day. I just if none of you suggest anything, I know that it's come up with my own thing, but yeah, if any of you've got any ideas of things that you're struggling with or want me to go over in more detail, please say. Because I do think I've been maybe getting a little bit too complicated with you recently. So yeah, please, if you have any ideas of things you want, I'm all ears as always. Right, I'll literally give you till 20 past to join, and then we will get going. Right. See how many people are on this evening. Slightly lowered numbers this evening. Do I play chess? I have been known to play chess, yeah. I haven't for a little while, but yeah, I do play chess, yeah. I used to. Yeah, I haven't done it in a little while. Right, okay. We've got five. There's a few people not joined. If you want to join, please do so now because I'm about to start. It'd be nice to have an even number. So if anyone wants to join, please do. Nice. Okay. Right. Cool. Right, you can still join midway through. Um, yeah, actually, I did. I marked it last week, and I gave it to Mr. Siddiqui. This was like probably I want to say Tuesday that I marked it last week. So it was like a little while ago that I marked it. Um, so if you haven't received it back, that's on Mr. Siddiqui. He hasn't. Yeah, I gave it to him like last Tuesday. It was all written marks, so I don't know if he wanted to give you it in person. I don't know. But it has been marked. Yeah. Right. Okay. Let's make a start. Get that. I can ask him. I don't deal with any of the email and stuff. I gave it to him to send. I assumed he would send it by email. I can chase that up. Um, yeah. Mhm. Oh gosh, it's gone off, hasn't it? I unfortunately don't know. We've not got a long game, though, to be fair. We've got things we need to go on with some things. YouTube. Hey, I don't know who Baguette is. Well, Baguette is winning. For those of you who aren't playing, you had a good week. Everything good? Right, it's a minute and a half left. Baguette is still in the lead. Who is Baguette? Boom. Mm, mm, mm. Right. 35 seconds left. Oh, Zara's climbing. S2S champion. Aaron back and raring. But Baguette, underdog Baguette is winning this one. Right, 10 seconds. Can S2S champion be defeated? Can we knock them off their perch? Nice. Right, third, Zara. S2S champion in second, and against all odds, Baguette is number one. Right, I want to see the report, see who has been doing their revision and who has not. Okay, so pretty good rates across the board, to be fair. Um, yeah, I'm seeing some decent numbers, slightly lower than we would like, but I'm pretty happy. Very nice. Well done, guys. Okay, right. Let's go on with what we can do today. So we have been looking in the past, so very recently, at AO2. We've done quite a lot on assessment objective 2 now, and we did in the past also look at assessment objective 1. So we're going to move on to our next assessment objective, which is assessment objective 4. And I've skipped out 3 because for a reason, because it is the least related to the others. Whereas assessment objective 4 carries on along the same vein as objective 2. So it kind of made sense to go this one first. So I briefly wanted to remind you what all the objectives were in case you've forgotten. And this is only for English language, not literature. So we've looked at assessment objective 1, which was comprehension questions, basically picking out quotes from a text. Very, very simple. We've also looked at assessment objective 2, which is about analyzing language and structure. Now we're going to come back onto assessment objective 3, but this is about finding similarities and differences between texts. And personally, it's probably the hardest of all assessment objectives. I see students most struggle with that question in exams. But today we're going to focus on assessment objective 4, which says, evaluate texts critically and support this with appropriate textual references. When it says evaluate, what do you think it means by the word evaluate? Ideas. And I highlight the word evaluating actually. Any ideas? Build up on? Yeah. I guess evaluating is deciding whether you agree or disagree with something, and then weighing up both sides of the argument. Like if I said to you, I want to evaluate, pardon me, whether we should build houses next to a lake. Well, you might say yes on one side, it'll provide more housing and boost the economy. But on the other side, you might say, oh, maybe not because building next to a lake is probably not the best idea because it's near water and it might not be a strong foundation for the house. So evaluating is coming up with both sides of the argument. Sandra says, expand or go into detail on opinions. Exactly that. Yeah, expand. Give your opinion and analyze why you think that way. So, and I wanted to reiterate that they're all same across all the exam boards. So when I talk about specific exam boards, don't think it doesn't apply to you because the skills are exactly the same. But over the next few weeks, I'm going to go into specifics about each exam board, just for everyone that's here gets a chance to have a look at their exam boards. But the skills are exactly the same. Now, if we're looking at the different exam boards, you'll notice that Edexcel has the highest percentage of AO4 questions compared to other exam boards in their exams. The others are relatively similar. AQA and OCR are exactly the same. Um, Educast slightly higher, but Edexcel really prioritizes these AO4 skills. So if you're Edexcel, then this is particularly good for you. Question two, paper two, AQA. Yeah, I can do that comes under AO1B/AO3. So I'm gonna leave that and come back to it. Okay, right. So let's look at the requirements of AO4, and they look like this. I've put down the sides. PETA. Think about PETA paragraphs. This is my own version for AO4 specifically. Um, Point, evidence, terminology, analyze, reader. So instead of PETA with an E, I put PETA with an A. And I've also included a W for writer's intentions. And I've done this for a reason, because if you look at the exam board specifications, this is what's provided by the exams, these are the 5 skills that you're getting tested on as part of AO4. Firstly, evaluating ideas, judging views, opinions, or attitudes presented in the texts. Consider whether the writer's viewpoint is convincing, biased, balanced, or exaggerated. In other words, making a point, deciding whether you agree or disagree with a statement. It's the equivalent of point. It's also the equivalent of thinking about the writer's intentions. Then you get tested on supporting that evaluation with evidence. So, can you pick out relevant quotes from the text that support your judgments? And in other words, the E for evidence of PETA. You then get tested on evaluating how effectively the writer has presented those ideas. And in order to do that, you need to consider the methods used, the language and the structure. In other words, the T for terminology. If you don't include key terms, you're not going to hit the higher marking bands. So you need to be considering language and structural techniques. Then you get tested on considering alternative interpretations. And this is what we're going to work on today a little bit. I've highlighted in yellow the word interpretations. What is an interpretation? Any ideas? Any ideas? A way of perceiving a piece of writing. It's absolutely right. Yeah, there can be multiple ways of perceiving writing. One reader might view something very differently to another reader who's read the same text. So, yeah, it's the way you see something, what you've gotten from the text. It's absolutely right. And AO4 is all about interpretations. If you're not including multiple interpretations in your answer, you are not going to hit those 2 highest marking bands. You need to be considering multiple interpretations in order to do that. And that is why I have changed the acronym to analyze instead of explain. Because analysis is slightly stronger than explanation. Analysis is like a deep dive. And so the way that this differs from AO2 is that AO2 is about structural analysis. It's about picking out language and explaining why the writer's done that. AO4 is still picking out terminology, but it's not about focusing on why the writer's chosen that technique. It's more about considering the effects on the reader. Like, why or what is the writer trying to tell you? So AO2 is like, why has the writer chosen that technique? And then AO4 is like, what is the writer trying to tell you? I guess is a very brief difference. And the 5th thing you get marked on is forming a clear and critical judgment. So giving a clear opinion and avoiding just describing. In other words, what is the effect on the reader? So PETA paragraphs, AQA. Might be a live stream. Whereas other exam boards split it 50-50. So they'll do half fiction, half non-fiction. So with Edexcel, it's paper one, question four, and then paper two, question six. Edgecast is paper one, question five, paper two, question four, and then OCR, paper two, question four, paper one, question eight. So they're kind of half and half of fiction and non-fiction. So just to reiterate what I said, here is my example of a Pitar paragraph. So when you're writing your answers, you should always be considering these sorts of questions. And they're not the only questions, but they're just to kind of get you thinking. So, point. Do you agree or disagree with the statement that will be given to you in the exam? Because in AO4, you normally will get given a statement about a text, and you'll be asked to decide if you agree or disagree with that statement. And if so, to what extent do you agree or disagree? And I guess it's worth saying as well that because we're considering multiple interpretations, you're not expected to fully agree with a statement. Sometimes you might agree partly with a statement, but then partly disagree. And that's what's going to get you a higher mark in this question. Because if you just write fully about, like, I agree because blah, 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 I also agree because blah, 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 that's not going to get you into the higher marking bands. What you need to be considering is, okay, I agree with this statement. However, I could understand why somebody else might not agree because of this reason. So you need to be considering multiple interpretations. Evidence. Are there any short quotes to support your point? Terminology. Are there any language or structural devices that support your point or that influenced your judgment? So considering how you came up with that opinion, were there any language or structural techniques that influenced your opinion? Analysis or analyze. Why did that device in quotes make you think that way? Anything about the connotations of the words? Can you pick apart words in multiple ways for new interpretations? Developing your own ideas. What do you think and why? Are there any alternative interpretations? And I've highlighted the words. And then what were the writer's intentions? And then finally, the reader. How has the quote made you feel? Has it helped you to understand something or think a certain way? It should always be questions that you're asking yourself. Um, when would I recap everything we've done this year? Probably nearer towards exams, to be honest. Um, yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know if we're going to have like an English revision session, to be honest. I don't know if that's going to be a thing. Um, we have science ones, and I will be running an A-level bio one and probably GCSE bio as well at some point soon. But I'm not sure about English, to be honest. Okay, right. So, some requirements then of this kind of question. Making judgments. So when you make your points, you should always be considering your opinion. A judgment is just a clear opinion about a statement. Now you need to decide how far you agree with that statement. Because like I said, you might not fully agree with your statement. You might only partly agree with it. You might think, okay, some part of the statement is true, but the other part I don't necessarily agree with. I would always be trying to aim to be in this middle agreement section, um, and not limit yourself to just fully agree or fully disagree. You'll see why when I show you the mark scheme for this question next week, but you will not get into the higher marking bands if you only support one side. You won't. It ain't gonna happen. So you might try and use statements sort of like this, and I would try and keep your judgment clear, focused, and balanced. And when you're making in can you some closer GCSEs, the lit paper is very soon. Can you do some Macbeth recaps? We shall see, because if it were up to me, I would be more than happy to do some Macbeth recapping. The problem is that as a company, we are very science and maths based. And so I don't know if there would be the audience large enough to warrant like a English language or revision day, to be honest. And we've got to think about costs from a business perspective. So yeah, if loads of you, that's something loads of you would want, then yeah, please get in touch with Mrs. Siddiqui. Like, please do. I'd be more than happy to run a little bit of a Macbeth revision sesh. Um, and then when would I start doing all this again? Start of next year? Hopes. Okay, so we also need to consider interpretations. So a strong analysis doesn't just stop at one meaning. Top responses explore different possible interpretations of a writer's choice. So you should always be considering multiple interpretations of a word, of a quote, of a technique. So that could be language and structure. It's important because different readers might read a text differently. Think about connotations of words. One reader might associate one thing with a word, another reader might associate a different thing with a word. So it's important. And I've highlighted this word of debate because evaluate is just a fancy word for debate. You want to be looking at both sides of an argument because doing so helps you to gauge deeper meanings of the writer's intentions. You're not limiting yourself to one side or the other. And then also including counter arguments. So counter argument is just another possible way to interpret a text. Um, and once you've given your view, what I would recommend is to make sure exploring the opposing view. Explore how other readers might see it differently. Sometimes you might not fully agree with the statement, so you want to explore alternative viewpoints to show depth and understanding. And I've given you some examples of useful phrases you could include. Things like alternatively, this could suggest. Another interpretation is that. However, it could also imply, on the other hand, the writer might be suggesting X, Y, Z. Um, and it's important to include interpretation and counter arguments because it shows your ability to critically think and to explore in depth the writer's intentions. So, yeah, you should be doing that. Just writing about your viewpoint does not get you into the top marking band. You must consider other viewpoints. Okay. And then I've linked back to our slide back connotations, but I won't go too heavily over connotations today. But what I will say is the importance of considering connotations of a word. Because a connotation is made by what it makes the reader think and feel. So readers might interpret words differently as they have different associations to those words. So make sure to explore every connotation of that word. I will give you one example. Let's say, for example, a rose. One person might associate a rose with like love. Another person might associate it with death. Both would be very valid. So a rose, normally you give someone if you're in love with them, but then also a rose is a flower. So it undergoes a cycle of life and death. So some people might associate it with like withering and decay. So it really is different. You can interpret words completely opposingly. Things like snakes as well. Some people might see that as like a danger signal. Other people might associate snakes as betrayal because of, the Garden of Eden and all of that. So it's up to you. But then also making sure to include language and structure. And I've highlighted them on here for you again. I'm of course not going to go through them all. We've been through them so many times. But I just wanted to leave them here so that you have them all available to you. So that you know that you can use any of these in your supports. So AO4 isn't about language analysis, so you don't need to go into detail a bit about each technique you mention, but focus on brief explanations of what the technique suggests and why the writers use it to influence the reader's viewpoint. However, you still need to mention the techniques accurately to score highly. And then I've given you the same for structure as well. So the very final thing I will leave you with before we do an example together today is also just remembering back to also talk about the effect on the reader. And I keep giving you this slide because I want to hammer it home that you should always be trying to use one of these words when exploring or describing the effects on the reader. Yeah, please do. Please, please, please. So always consider, how does the writer make you feel? Do they make you ask any questions? Do they help you to understand anything? Do they help you to think in a certain way? Do they help you to sympathize with the character, etc.? Please be using those words. And then I've left you some things about writer's intentions. So, we're not going to go through a full extract today, but what I do want to get you thinking about is interpretation and what it means to think about things opposingly. So, we're not going to go through a specific, like, full exam past paper, but I want to go through this example from AQA purely in the context of interpretation, just to help you kind of build that skill a little bit. So, a student said, I wasn't at all surprised by the disappearance of the stranger child at the end of the extract. The writers left us in no doubt that she is just part of Rosie's imagination. To what extent do you agree? Now, I've highlighted in purple the bit that I wanted to focus on today. The writers left us in no doubt, keyword there being no doubt, that she is just part of Rose's imagination. So, as I'm reading through this extract, because I'll read you the whole thing, I want you to think about, do you agree or disagree that the child in the extract is in Rosie's head, is in her imagination? Or do you think she is real? Up to you. I'll briefly read it and then I'll pick out some quotes. So, a little girl was sitting back on her heels beside a clump of daisies that grew against the fence. She had her back to Rosie and was holding tight to the handle of a large wicker basket that stood on the ground beside her. Kara seemed unfazed by the girl's presence and continued to move, engrossed along the row of plants. Rosie bent forward to look through the clearest of the panes and peered closer. The child was small, maybe around 8 or 9, although something in the tense hunch of her shoulders made her seem older. Her hair hung down her back in a matted, dusty-looking plait, and she was wearing dressing up clothes, an ankle-length dress and pinafore in washed-out greys and tans, like a homemade Cinderella costume. Where on earth had she come from? She must be a neighbour's child, but how had she got in? The wooden fence that separated the gardens between each of the houses and the terrace were high, surely too high for a child to climb. The child glanced over her shoulder, back towards the houses, a quick, furtive movement as if she were scanning the upper windows of the row, afraid of being overlooked. Rosie caught a glimpse of her face, pale and drawn with anxiety, before the girl turned back and reached forward to quickly tuck a piece of trailing white cloth into the basket. Almost unconsciously, Rosie registered that the girl was left-handed like herself, and that there was almost something animal-like in her movements, quick like the darting of a mouse or the flit of a sparrow, some small dun creature that moved fast to blend into the background. Something wasn't right here. She'd seen distress in those eyes. Rosie turned away, dried her hands hurriedly, and slipped on her flip-flops. She would go gently, raise no challenge about her being in the garden, but say hello and trying to find what was the matter. Maybe if she pointed out that her mother would be worrying where she was, she could persuade the girl to let her take her home. But when she stepped outside, the girl was gone. Okay, so I'm going to break it down. I'm going to give you some examples of some quotes. And I want you to put in the chat whether you agree or disagree that the girl is in Rosie's head. So Kara seemed unfazed by the girl's presence and continued to move, engrossed along the row of plants. Kara is like the child. Kara is like the child of Rosie. But she's unfazed by the girl's presence. So what does Kara's reaction suggest about the girl's presence? If the girl were really there, would Kara behave this way? Could Kara simply be distracted or unable to see the girl? And are there any language or structural devices that would support your points? So, firstly, let's think about the word unfazed. What does that suggest about the girl? Do you think she's in Rosie's imagination or do you think she's real? If the Kara is unfazed by the girl. Any ideas? Imagination, imagination. Why are you saying imagination? Because I got a few imaginations now. Why? What made you think that? Anything in particular? I like your thinking, though. I would agree. Personally. She wasn't bothered after sensing her presence. Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, the total complete calm that the girl feels. I agree. It may suggest that Kara is not bothered or does not notice her presence. Yeah, I think on one hand, you could interpret it like the girl does not exist. She's in Rosie's head because she's unfazed. The adjective unfazed suggests complete calm and lack of reaction, which could imply that Kara cannot see the girl at all, supporting the idea that the child may only exist in Rosie's imagination. Yeah. She's not bothered, she doesn't care. Yeah. What about the word seemed, though? Every supporting point I've put in yellow, and any counterpoint I'm going to put in purple. So, to support the girl being in her imagination, Kara was unfazed, suggesting that she didn't see her, that she might not exist. But what about the word seemed might counter my point? What about the word seemed might make her seem like she's real? Anything there? We're giving some alternative interpretations here. Because it could have said Kara was unfazed, but it didn't. It says Kara seemed unfazed. This is from Rosie's perspective. Does that support her being in her imagination or not? Maybe she does exist, but Kara didn't notice her. I agree, yeah. I think by using this word seemed, it's almost presenting Rosie's view being like unreliable almost. Like I went with this, right? I said, however, this interpretation is complicated by the verb seemed, which creates a subtle sense of uncertainty. The juxtaposition between unfazed and seemed suggests that Rosie is interpreting Kara's behavior rather than stating it as fact, meaning that Kara's reaction may not entirely be reliable evidence. Like, it could have said Kara was unfazed, but Rosie said that she seemed unfazed. So that kind of to me suggests uncertainty, like it's not absolute fact. So it is possible that Kara just didn't notice the girl. Like she's there, but she just didn't notice her. Possibly. Um, seems seem means to give the impression that she was not absolute. I like the double negative. Yeah, yeah, that she was not absolute. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. Um, and then what about the word engrossed? Might suggest that the girl is real. Anything there? Like Kara was engrossed along the row of plants. Anything there? If you're engrossed in something, you're like giving your full attention to something. Focused, yeah, yeah, yeah. So to me, that verb engrossed implies that Kara is just deeply absorbed in her activity. Maybe the girl was there, but Kara just didn't notice her because she's really focused on what she's doing. So, it could provide a more ordinary explanation for her lack of response. She may simply just be too focused on the plants to notice the girl. Yeah. So this is what I mean, different interpretations. One person might see it like um, she didn't react because the girl wasn't there. But then other people might read it as, oh, she didn't react because she's so invested in the plants that she just didn't notice the girl. So it's how you want to interpret it. It's up to you. Rosie bent forward to look through the clearest of the panes and peered closer. What does the phrase the clearest of the panes suggest about the other panes of glass? Why might the writer emphasize that Rosie chooses the clearest pane? And what does the verb peered suggest about how Rosie is looking? So, I don't want to give you it. So, firstly, clearest. What does the phrase the clearest of the panes of glass suggest about the other panes of glass? Sorry. Yeah, it is. Like, if you're saying the clearest of the panes, to me, that's implying that the other panes aren't particularly clear. And if you're looking through a window that's like not clear and is all smudged, can you see out of the window properly? To me, I know, I mean, no one's answering me, but I would say no. So to me, the fact that it's mentioned the clearest. I made a point of mentioning the word clearest. It's hinting at the girl may not be real because Rose's view of the garden is potentially unreliable. The phrase "the clearest of the plains" implies that not all of the planes of glass are clear, suggesting that Rose's vision may be partially obstructed or distorted. This could mean that what she believes she sees is not completely accurate, supporting the idea that the child may be a product of her imagination. I was meant to put that in yellow. I put that in purple by accident. Let me change that now. So yeah, that kind of supports the idea that she may be in her imagination. Because if the window isn't clear, it's suggesting that she couldn't see her properly, and maybe she's not even there at all, and she's just seeing things through the smudged window, if we're thinking about it logically. What about the word peered? Any ideas about peered? Does this suggest that she's real or not? Change this to yellow as well. I don't know. Generated service is meant to be yellow. Any ideas? If someone were to peer, to me, that verb suggests like straining effort, like like she's trying to see properly. She's hesitant and perhaps scared. Oh, I liked that. Oh, I hadn't thought about interpretation. Oh, I like it. Yeah, yeah. I kind of went down the vibe of that she's like straining to see. So it's almost reinforcing the idea that we don't know if the girl is there or not because you can't see out the window properly. But I like that. I'm going to add that as an alternative interpretation. Um, that yeah, that when you peer, you might do so out of hesitance. I like that. Ooh, I'm adding that. So the verb peered could also um suggest hesitance, fear from Rosie, supporting the idea that um her presence. Yeah, that's no, I like that way of thinking. So I put it in purple. But however, the verb peered could also suggest hesitance or fear from Rosie, supporting the idea that the girl may not be in her imagination, that she's confused and scared of her presence. Nice, I like that. Then purple. Okay, right. Let's go. So, Rosie bent forwards. Um, what does this suggest? Do you think this supports or goes against the idea that she's in Rosie's imagination or not? And again, I've put this in the wrong color. I don't know what I was doing earlier when I was doing all my colors. Clearly, I just forgot what color was what. Well, I'll tell you. To me, I think the fact that she was like choosing to bend over like shows deliberate action. Like she's trying to actively ensure what she sees in the garden is accurate, which suggests to me or implies that the girl is really there, and Rosie's just trying to confirm what she's noticed. Okay. She was wearing dressing up clothes, an ankle-length dress and pinafore in washed-out grays and tans, like a homemade Cinderella costume. Let's focus firstly on the dressing up clothes and the idea of Cinderella. Um, how could this be used as interpretation that the girl is in Rosie's imagination? Any ideas? Any ideas? Cinderella is a fairy tale. Exactly. Cinderella is not real. Cinderella is made up character, fictional character, and the use of it suggests it's all in Rosie's mind. I like it. I agree. Yeah, Cinderella's a fairy tale character. Like, I think, yeah, okay, she's in like a costume of Cinderella, but also just the mention of Cinderella has associations of like not being real, I guess, like imagination. So one interpretation is that reference to Cinderella suggests that the girl may not be real. The outfit, the dressing up clothes, implies fantasy and make believe, which links closely to the fairy tale tales of childhood imagination. The fact that it's homemade and Cinderella costume links her to a fictional character, blurring the boundary between reality and story, and that illusion may suggest that Rosie is interpreting what she sees through the lens of a familiar narrative rather than observing the child. Nice. Could it show the unbelievableness of it? I think it could. So my question is this then. Is there any opposing interpretation of Cinderella? We said on one hand, it could be like fairy tale, make believe, maybe Rosie's just viewing it through like a familiar narrative lens. But is there any interpretation that the Cinderella costume could actually imply that she is real in any way? When you think of Cinderella, what do you think of? Any ideas? Any associations anyone wants to throw out there? A missing shoe. I mean, yeah. The Cinderella has implied that she is missing child. Possibly. Real people usually dress up extravagantly. Cinderella. Think about the associations. To me, when I think of Cinderella, like it's someone who was overlooked and neglected, right? Like by her stepmom and her stepsisters. Perhaps the girl is also just overlooked and neglected. So Cinderella is a character who is ignored and undervalued by those around her, often going unnoticed despite being present. Perhaps on a symbolic level, the girl is the same. She's present, but she's just not being acknowledged, therefore symbolizing the girl's vulnerability and social invisibility. So maybe she's not actually in Rose's imagination. She's just like Cinderella. She's symbolically overlooked, like all the other, like Cinderella is. Again, writers' intentions. Writers make choices purposefully. They choose words purposefully. You should always be thinking, what do you associate with Cinderella? That someone who's ignored and overlooked, like the girl. There's possible interpretation of this. In washed out greys and tans, does that, do you think, support the fact that the girl is in Rosie's head or not? And if so, why? Any ideas? Even the homemade, if anyone wants to comment on the homemade nature of the costume, please do. Okay, I'll tell you what I've said. I said that in terms of the homemade, I think it implies modesty, almost poverty, which could hint that the girl comes from a different background and may not attract attention from others. In this interpretation, the illusion emphasizes that the girl exists but is easily disregarded, reinforcing the possibility that characters like Kara fail to notice her rather than proving that she's a product of Rose's imagination. But equally, you might want to mention the dull imagery of the costume, which is faded and unreal, almost like something from an old story. Yeah, so you could link her existence to the faded nature of the costume. That, like the costume, she's like not ex there's inexistent, basically. Okay, I'll skip this one. I want to do some next ones. I want to do this one. The wooden fences were high, surely too high for a child to climb. Why might the writer emphasize the height of the fences? Why does, or what does this suggest about how the girl entered the garden? Are there any language or structural devices that support your view? So, let's begin with the wooden fences were high. What does this suggest about the girl's presence? Do you think she's in Rose's imagination, or do you think she's real? And why? Any ideas? Any ideas? Real? Someone's saying real. Anyone agree? Anyone disagree? Why we said real? Just curiosity. Hassan says fake. Samuel says the wooden fences may suggest that this is a barrier. Ooh, I like that barrier. It's a good way of thinking about that. I'm with this. I think on a literal level, you've got to think like if it's describing the fences as high, a child's probably quite small. On a literal level, they probably can't climb over the fence. So the repetition of that adjective of high, because it was high and high, and the declarative structure of the clause, the fences were high, it places focus on the physical impossibility that the girl would have been able to climb over the fence, suggesting that she is in Rosie's head. Plus, the fence symbolizes a practical barrier. Samuel's on it with barrier that would prevent the girl from entering the garden, emphasizing the low likelihood of her be able to enter the garden. Um, it then says, surely too high for a child to climb. What about this dash, surely? Do you think that's supporting that she's in her head, or do you think that's supporting that the girl is real? Debate. Any ideas? I'll give you 20 seconds. If no one replies, I will tell you. Her doubt shows that she is most likely is fake. Oh, I love it. Hassan's absolutely on the grind today. Yeah, it's doubt, isn't it? By having that fragmented structure and the surely, it kind of reflects Rosie's uncertainty and doubt, doesn't it? As almost like as if she's trying to rationalize something that doesn't make sense. The adverb of surely implies that Rosie's attempting to convince herself of logic, reinforcing that the girl's presence cannot be explained. This suggests that Rosie's questioning her own perception, suggesting that she might be in her imagination. Showing her height and foreshadowing something might happening or could have happened. Foreshadowing is a good way to think about it, actually. Yeah. Like, I think it kind of ties into this foreshadowing. Like, if the girl can't literally get over the fence, that kind of foreshadows something supernatural. That like Rosie's trying to make sense of the situation. Um, is there any alternative interpretation, though, that you could give of this uncertainty? Notice you've got an ellipses here, as well as the fragmented dash, as well as the uncertain adjective. Is there any interpretation you could give about actually how it shows the girl is real? How someone else might view this? Think about like narration. We've looked in the past, and when we looked at structure, at reliable and unreliable narration. And I think Rosie is an unreliable narrator. I think, or rather, I'll see if anyone comes up with anything, because it is an interesting debate. Hassan says, surely could show that the child could have climbed the fence, because the pause would indicate thought. I agree, Hassan. I absolutely agree. I think Rosie is an unreliable narrator. Therefore, her judgment is subjective. Like, just because she might not have been able to climb over the fence doesn't mean that she didn't. Like, it might have been difficult for her, but it doesn't mean that she absolutely didn't. So just because like she hasn't seen her climb the fence doesn't mean it didn't happen. So her lack of confidence there, on one hand, could imply that like she's trying to convince herself of something. But on the other side, it could imply that like, okay, she didn't see it, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen, and that she is like, there's no evidence, and that's why she's trying to help herself understand. Okay, we'll do one more quote, and that should end us for today. I'll actually do the next one. Something animal-like in her movements, quick like the darting of a mouse or the flit of a sparrow. Um, why does the writer compare the girl to small animals? What does this suggest about the girl's behavior or personality? Um, so let's start with animal-like in her movements. Why do you think the writer has compared her to small animals? Does that show that the girl is in Rose's imagination, or does it suggest that the girls are real? Yeah, they're uploaded onto YouTube every week. So if you find our company YouTube, Step to Success, you will find my beautiful face every week. And as well, you have access to these slides. They are on the English. I uploaded them last week. I updated them. Okay, I'll tell you. This is what I said. I think this simile comparing her to animals almost gives the impression of like something sudden and fleeting. Like when we think of mice and sparrows, these words of darting and flit suggest that her movements are really quick and really sudden, which on a literal level is unlikely. And so it kind of gives the idea that she's difficult to observe and almost makes her feel quite elusive, like she's not really there, kind of thing. So you could argue that she's in Rosie's head because the movements make her seem unhuman or inhuman, rather. And as well, it says something animal-like. Like earlier, the quote I didn't show you was something wasn't right. The word something gets repeated here. Um, you get this repetition of quite vague language. The something wasn't right. Something animal-like in her movements. There's no like declarative to her opinions. They're all very vague and general and almost quite unreliable. Almost trying to emphasize that the girl's not real because there's so much ambiguity and uncertainty surrounding her existence. There's nothing certain about her existence. It's just something animal-like. Something wasn't right that Rosie can't put her finger on. So that, along with like the fleeting movements of the girl, just seems so, I don't know, imaginary. And then also we could view this um, from a alternative interpretation. Yes, there is vague language, but it could also imply that Rosie cannot precisely define what she's seeing, reinforcing the possibility that she is interpreting ordinary movements in an exaggerated way. Perhaps this could be supported by the animalistic imagery, which would also highlight the girl's nervousness and fear. So, yes, it is kind of almost supernatural in the way that she's moving and unrealistic. But she could just be describing fear. Like if you describe somebody as moving like a mouse, sometimes you imply that they're just scared. So, okay, it's an unrealistic way of moving, which suggests she's in Rose's head, but it could just be because she's scared and she is real. So, small animals often move quickly to avoid danger. So, in this interpretation, the imagery emphasizes the child's vulnerability rather than questioning her existence, suggesting that she is real but behaving cautiously. Okay, we will stop there because it is late. Okay, what I will do then is I will stay around for a few minutes in case anyone has any questions. Um, yeah, but next week, we're going to deep dive into AQA specifically, and we're going to do a practice sort of question. I'll show you some model answers as well. But yeah, have a nice week, guys. Yeah, whatever you should do with it. Okay, on where did you upload it? There is a shared. I keep meaning to chase Mrs. Siddiqui about this, and I keep forgetting. Um, There is a shared place where all of the slides go uploaded. Your parents should have access to it. If you don't, I would recommend emailing Mr. Siddiqui for that for the link again. Because there is a place where you will find all of my English slides for you to peruse at your leisure for revision. So I would recommend, if you do not have access to that, email Mr. Siddiqui. Yeah, it's my advice. Okay. Any more questions before we call it the night? Oh, night is on. Right. I'll let you all go then.